We're bringing the questions to Detroit's next mayor, not behind a podium and bright lights, or on a far-off island few here have visited. This conversation is happening right here in the neighborhoods where it truly matters.
Authenticity, and that's probably one of the things that drove me into politics because I got sick of politicians who look at folks, stakeholders, as if they're idiots, stupid. That's the problem. They think because a person lives in a certain area, they don't know what's going on. So you look at them in the face, and here's a glaring one for me, having come out of law enforcement: defund the police. Okay, so talk to Miss Smith on the east side of Detroit, who lives in the highest crime rate of the city, and ask her what she thinks about defund the police. Because you're not really representing people. And that's the difference between a politician and a public servant. And, I'm wired as a public servant. I've been doing it for 44 years.
That's why you're running.
Yeah,
Now,
that's why I'm running.
well, I wanted to say this to you first, is thank you for your service
Thank you.
to the city and law enforcement. As you said, it does take courage to put on the badge and go and protect and serve a community. So we appreciate that first. So, but we also want to ask you, we picked this place, having a nice coffee. What does this say about your campaign? It appears that this is a small business.
Small business, absolutely.
So why here?
Well, it's a new small business. It's a beautiful place in the heart of Detroit. And, I feel so, like my announcement, as you may remember, was in a East Side Detroit barbershop. I didn't have to go to some swanky location to do it because I wanted folks to know this is important to me. If we're going to grow the middle class, if Detroit's going to become that thriving city, I say we continue to entice large corporations to come into the city. But as important, creating economic opportunity for people in neighborhoods who generally haven't had that opportunity, because that's one of the big complaints. I hear the two Detroits, and while there's been strides made in the neighborhoods, we need to do more. I've talked to so many small businesses, and their main complaint is, I'm investing in this business, but it takes months, in some instances years, to get through the bureaucratic madness coming out of City Hall.
Mm-hmm.
That's not efficient. And so, a point in case, there was a lady who I met. She opened a cigar bar, sports bar on the east side of Detroit, near the plant. And I went there, visited with her, and she said, I got 3 businesses. I was excited to hear that, and I assumed that they were in Detroit. She said, well, 2 of them are in Dearborn. I said, Dearborn? Why Dearborn? Because it's seamless. And the frustrations I feel right now with this business who's only 75% open, I don't know how long it's going to take for the city to do the necessary inspection so I can start reaping benefit from my investment.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was an article, I guess 2 or 3 years ago, about restaurants in Detroit. 77 steps. And now that draws my attention to another African-American owned business down on Jefferson, the Ivy. Nice business, but constantly dealing with the inspections. And then she's opened a second location. That's good for our economy. That's good to keep and stabilize our taxes. That's a big issue in Detroit. But instead, she's got to jump through 100 hoops to try to get these businesses up to full staff and running. But it's a red tape bureaucracy. Yeah. But I have a plan for that.
I'm going to ask you about that too. I was going to say a lot of red tape. I want to ask you about that. But first I want to ask you about something that's happening right now. New York, LA, Chicago. It could happen here. If a protest happens under your leadership, which you have experience in, how would you respond? How would you ensure public safety while still protecting the right to peacefully protest?
I did it. I lived it. I don't care what other candidates will say about it. Maybe they read something in a book. Maybe they're trying to articulate my playbook. It's nothing like being out and having done it. Being the mayor of the city of Detroit is not an on-the-job training. You need somebody that you plug in and go to work day one. That's just reality. And to say, well, Chief, these things don't happen in Detroit. Oh, really? No, we should not say that, because when I've used real examples of mayors who showed weakness and were hesitant to make decisions, and I can go down a list of them. I can talk about LA right now if you want. And that was my old home. And, I had the good fortune of seeing the unrest here in Detroit in 67 when I was 11 years old. 9 years later, I'm in the police department at 19. So I saw it firsthand. And then fast forward, I was in Los Angeles on the ground and serving the people of LA when the Rodney King uprising took place.
Mm-hmm.
And what was so unique about that, unlike insurrections in the past or uprisings in the past, this wasn't just local to one specific geographic area, it was citywide.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw what went wrong in LA. Number one, a field commander who initially responded to the epicenter made a bad decision, a lieutenant, to retreat. He, along with his squad, left the location. I said, what's going on? That's not the LAPD I know and came up in. And then you got a mayor and a police chief, very popular police chief, that they didn't have a relationship. They didn't communicate. They were both at separate events when the uprising initially started. And certainly there was no leadership coming from either office. So it just grew and grew. I never forgot those lessons. Fast forward Detroit, 2020. I remember vividly, and I tell this story, I had a vision. I knew that the George Floyd, his death could potentially result in large-scale uprisings. I just knew it. Instinctively, I knew that. And so 2 weeks before any riots anywhere in the country, I gave very clear direction to my team that I want to make sure these officers are trained for civil unrest because we have a new police force. I need that, and I also need to know if we have the proper equipment in the event there is unrest. I remember giving this specific direction on a Monday because I had the vision over the weekend. Monday, I gave the direction. I went back to the assistant chief I gave the direction to and says, okay, I need to know, where are we? He said, I haven't started anything. I said, obviously you didn't understand my message. So instead of now giving you more time to delay what needs to happen, how about you get it started today? Well, the logistics, I don't care about the logistics, get it done today. 2 weeks later, the nation erupted. All these major cities, fires, looting, police officers being attacked. The same MO. Outside agitators coming into these different cities who were the ones stoking the violence. I knew it. And we took a firm position, zero tolerance, not in Detroit. But we had something else. In addition to the leadership and the ability to make and be decisive and show some courage, we also had relationships with our community, activist community, clergy. And I had a conversation with him. Said, Chief, we're standing with you. Nobody's going to come in here and burn and loot in our city. Everybody expected Detroit to be one of the first cities to go up because of our history. Mm-hmm. It didn't. Mm-hmm. And I stand behind it. And any criticism I get now, because there are some that criticize me and said, well, Detroit, Will Bree filed a lawsuit, $1 million lawsuit, and the city settled. How do you feel about it? I reject it. I don't agree with the decision because we did it right. Were there instances where some of our officers overstepped? Yes. In one instance, an officer, I remember vividly, I was armed with a non-lethal shotgun, fired on 3 reporters after a group of people were dispersing. He fires the non-lethal round, striking them, and I immediately suspended him, fired him. We gave the case over to the prosecutor's office, and I believe ultimately he was sentenced, found guilty and sentenced. And we did it in a transparent way. Mm-hmm. I only use that as an example because as mayor, we have to operate in a place of transparency, authenticity, and integrity. You can't trade those away. And that's why before we went on the air, like I said, one of the problems that so many people have today is how people can look you in the eye without hesitation and say, you know, the borders are challenging, but they're not open. Wow, I guess we're all stupid. The borders are open, but they're challenging. People are not dumb. And when you're a public servant, you know who you work for.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these folks in politics work for self, ego, power, and it should never be that.
Well, I mean, you also were deputy mayor at that time, I remember, and
Yes.
I covered the protests, and so I saw a majority of people were peaceful, but there were some people, there were agitators there,
Absolutely.
throwing rocks, big rocks, fireworks, and other things at the officers on the front lines.
Railroad spikes.
I saw that too.
Yes.
I did. I want to talk about crime real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Overnight, 2 homicides. Metro Detroit News was on scene there. What is your strategy to reduce violent crime, especially in neighborhoods that are most affected, and neighbors who are most affected by it?
Well, you know, that's a great question because as chief, during my 8-year tenure, certainly we had a profound impact on reducing violence. There's no secret to it. You know, when I came in 2013, the city was going through bankruptcy. You had a police department that certainly their morale was at the bottom. They were under a 13-year consent decree of federal oversight. And then you had a community whose morale was also down because they had lost total confidence in the Detroit Police Department. You remember the widespread reports, 1-hour response time to 911 call for service. An emergency call for service, 1 hour. I don't know of any major city that has a standard like that. Not one. I mean, I worked in LA, a much bigger city. 7-minute response time, average. So that wasn't acceptable. I understood the dynamics of what was going on in Detroit. You know, 10% of the police officers' pay was stripped. They didn't feel supported because of the federal oversight. There was a devastating, I'll use the word devastating leadership void in the Detroit Police Department. No leadership. A revolving door with chiefs of police. And then not to mention the fact that there were physical police stations closed. They closed half the police stations. And one of them, most notable, was on the west side of Detroit, the most densely populated area, the 8th precinct. Physically closed it. Doesn't work out real well. And lastly, and as important, when we talk about violent crime, homicide clearance rate, the number of homicides cleared, 11%. Not anywhere close to the national average. So you ask the question, why? When you don't have a relationship with a community, they're not going to talk to you. And let's face it, we can talk about all the great technology we have to, you know, abate violence and make arrests. That's just part of it. Good old-fashioned police work means that you have a relationship and people talk to you. That's how most of the homicides get solved. Now, we have to corroborate that with other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was no surprise that it was at 11%, but all of that changed. So I would build on what we started. I can't tell you what's going on in the police department right now. I've been gone almost 3 years. Mm-hmm. You know, one thing that was very important to me during my tenure is establishing neighborhood police officers. They were out in the field responsible for a geographic footprint, which was important because they were like many chiefs of police.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So community members, business owners, they knew. Here it is. And let's talk about Green Light Detroit. You can't forget about that. My critics would say, oh, it didn't work. That's a bunch of malarkey. Really? Let me tell you how I know. Green Light Detroit was birthed because Detroit was the carjack capital of the nation. Now, I started July 2013. By year end, there were over 800 carjackings in Detroit. And I was just blown away by that. What was even more surprising was the fact that police officers and community members were desensitized by carjacking.
Hmm.
It was almost like you were talking about a car theft. We're talking about a robbery, armed robbery, not a car theft. Very different. And so I was in Cincinnati, I was in LA. You just didn't, I mean, did it happen? Of course.
Hmm.
To that level, not even close. And so that's the birth of Green Light Detroit. Because I wanted to know, when are these crimes taking place? What time? And predictably, they were happening during hours of darkness and at convenience, liquor stores, party stores, and gas stations.
So you would double down with Green Light program.
Well, yeah, I would continue to drive it
Mhm.
because I know it works. And I wanted to also say that how I know how wildly successful it was. So I think right now we're probably in excess of 900 green light locations, which includes some green light corridors. But when my critics come back and say, oh, it doesn't work, I say, well, wait a minute. We went from 800 plus carjackings to my last full year as chief to right at a little under 200. Something worked.
Major difference. I want
And
to.
that's about safety. And so what I'm saying is, as mayor, having the vision to think outside the box and look for solutions to continue to drive crime down. As one last thing I want to add, because I think it's important for your viewers, is that so recently the police department reported out, we have the lowest homicide numbers since the 60s. What was different about Detroit in the 60s? Let me tell you, I know. We were the fifth largest city. We had about 1.5, 1.6 residents. I know when I started in the 70s, we had about 6,500 police officers. Wow. So our population today is at 633. We have about, I don't know, 26, 2,700 police officers. So we really wave a flag of success. Now look, I like data. I like showing declines. But when I talk about the perception of crime, let's get out and have conversation with the community and ask them how they feel. That's who I'm going to talk to.
Yeah.
And I talk to them now, and I have since I left the police department. And I'll tell you what many have told me. It was safer when you were chief. And I guess a lot of it has to do with the tone, the perception. A lot of that weighs in on lower, improving that perception that, yes, it is safer.
Well, I want to talk about the current administration, not in detail, but have you had any recent conversations with Mayor Duggan?
I have not recently. We cross paths occasionally. I saw him at an event. It might have been maybe 2 months ago now.
Um, how would you differ from him, or would you continue? How would you continue the momentum?
I am different. I applaud Mayor Duggan for what he did coming in. I know he came in as we were in bankruptcy. I was already here. Dane was still the mayor. And as the mayor came in, he came in focusing on the basics. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but because it needed to happen. I mean, things that other cities take for granted. This wasn't a conversation in Cincinnati or LA or Maine. Streetlights. I've never lived in a city where streetlights were out. I've never lived in a city where we're talking about these long response times or infrequent trash pickup or during the winter roads that are not being treated through salt or whatever. That wasn't a conversation. And I know that the mayor put a lot of focus on it, as he should have, because certainly when a city is in that kind of disrepair, you got to give folks hope. And he did that. But also at the same time, there was development going on. And people talk a lot about downtown. Downtown was like a ghost town in 2013. And now it's a thriving city center. And that should continue, will continue on my watch. But as important as creating that same excitement in the neighborhoods, small business development. We must do it. And I talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
We got to fix our schools, even though the mayor doesn't control the schools.
Well, and I have a question about that in a minute. Just have a couple more questions here. I wanted to ask you, you talked about relationships and kind of talking about these other cities. We know what's happening in LA. And we know that you publicly said that you're a Republican. And that surprised some people.
I
Not
don't
me
know
so
how it.
much.
I don't
But
know how it could surprise. So let me see. Let me paint this picture. When people say they're surprised, so clue number one. Clue number one. Wow, he's on Fox News
bi-weekly.
bi-weekly. What's going on here? Two, he's on the cover not once but twice on the NRA magazine. Whoa, what's going on here? Three, he's very open and direct and criticizing what's wrong in some of these other cities. I never shied away from that. So, yes, I've always been a conservative. I was a conservative Democrat who I always say that the Democrat Party left me and I became a Republican. It wasn't overnight. It was a transition.
I know that in this election, mayoral here in the city, there's not a DRR or an I behind the
It's
name.
nonpartisan.
Right. But do you expect an endorsement from Donald Trump?
You know, I don't know. Donald, I have a relationship with him. And I'll say this, as mayor, I would leverage the relationship because like Mayor Duggan, he had a relationship with President Biden. And because of that good relationship, lots of dollars came into the city of Detroit. Some of those dollars are set to run out. And we cannot afford to not have federal support. My commitment to the people of Detroit is I will leverage that relationship so that we can get the kind of funding that Detroit's going to need as we go forward.
Let's talk about our young people. You touched on schools. And I want to say this, Metro Detroit News is committed to supporting our city's future. What's your plan to support Detroit's schools and our children here?
I'm glad you said it because I've always, had passion for education, passion in working with children, from working with police athletic leagues and all the cities just about that I work. I believe in the program. But one of the things that we have in Detroit, like other cities, especially in neighborhoods of black and brown residents, we have broken schools. I saw it in LA, I saw it in Cincinnati, and it's here in Detroit. Now, some on the educational side get angry when I talk about it, but as mayor, we can't afford not to talk about it. We can't afford not to be involved. We have to be. Because candidly, when third graders cannot read, and even though I was doing the gubernatorial race, I was talking about only 8% Detroit public school children can read. They say, you're wrong, Chief. It's 11%. Wow. We've moved up a couple of digits. So 11% of school children can read in the third grade because by the time they get in the fourth grade, they had to read to learn. So we're pushing children through the system, not educating them. What's the impact to our city? I will tell you direct. I saw it firsthand. Now, two things. I'm going to talk about, Mike Duggan got a automobile manufacturing plant here in Detroit for the first time in 30 years. I probably was sitting in as a deputy mayor then. And I remember he also negotiated that 3,500 Detroiters would be hired. But here's the reality. Many of them couldn't pass the exam that was provided to the candidates because today's automobile manufacturing is automated. It's a different world now. So when we think about it, and oh, by the way, I saw it as police chief. Hire Detroiters. Okay. We have examinations, but not just to get hired by the police department. Then we have an academy that has a strong or significant academic portion. And we noticed that there were some of our candidates in the academy having struggles to get through. Saw the same thing in Los Angeles. So the schools have to be a big part of the mayor's agenda. And of course, I recognize we don't run the schools. but we can certainly support the schools, work closely with the schools, and also leverage funding for the schools, but make sure that the funding is appropriately dispensed. Because the schools have gotten money in a very transparent way. I want to know, where's it going?
And Chief, we got another interview, so we got to keep it going. But our last question for you, and you can look at the camera and say this because it's two Detroiters. What's the one message you want every Detroiter to hear from you? If nothing else, what do you want them to hear from you?
I'm a Detroiter first. I was born here in the city of Detroit. But more importantly, the most important part is, you know the body of work when I was your chief. I think I had about a 78% at one point approval rating in Detroit because I was transparent, authentic, and results driven. We got it done together. As your mayor, nothing changes. Judge me on who I am, the authenticity, the high integrity, and the ability to serve you as a public servant, just like I did when I was your police chief.
Thank you, sir. So first, I just want to thank you for doing this. And then I also want to say to you, thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you.
Especially in the nonprofit sector too,
Yes.
and all the work that you do in the city.
Thank you.
And we want to get to know you. And so first off, we're here at a senior citizen community.
Yes.
Why'd you decide to invite us here to talk with you?
Because I'm talking to seniors every day. They are such an important part of this community, right? They have given everything to us. They've raised their children. Some have raised grandchildren, and they're trying to live out their golden years with dignity and respect. So it's really important as a public servant to understand what that means for them, where we've done a good job, and those places where there's still challenges and work to do.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And now I'm just going to look at my phone. We're going to ask you a couple more questions. I'm going to flip the script a little bit here.
Okay.
To talk about some of the protests that we have going on right now.
Okay.
We're trying to keep this tight since it's going on social. As you know, our attention span is very short.
Yes.
We appreciate your first response there, right?
Okay.
So what we're seeing right now on the news, New York,
Yes.
LA, now Chicago, it could happen here too.
Yes.
If a protest happens under your leadership, how would you respond? How would you ensure public safety while still protecting the right to peacefully protest?
Yes. First, I certainly believe in the right to peacefully protest. And I also believe that we have to keep the public safe. And Detroit has done a really good job of that. I think our former Chief White did an amazing job. Our current Chief Bettison is doing an amazing job. And their ability to be on the ground with the public and with protesters has enabled us to maintain peaceful protests throughout all the unrest.
Thank you for that. And let's talk about crime now. 2 homicides overnight here in the city of Detroit. Metro Detroit News was on the scene of those. What's your strategy to reduce violent crime, especially in neighborhoods most affected by it?
Yes. Thank you for that question. My crime fighting strategy is twofold. We have to talk about prevention because we can't over police ourselves into safety. So prevention and opportunities for young folks that, deter them from gangs and drugs. It's about safe spaces and places between the hours of 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. It's working with our school systems to create career opportunities and investing in our kids from cradle to career. And then as it relates to policing, community policing is so important. It can't just be a few officers or a division. It's got to be a philosophy throughout our police department so that we're steeped in communities in a positive way.
Let's talk about investment. How will you expand support for small businesses across the entire city?
Yes.
Not just downtown or midtown?
Yes.
And how will you keep downtown's momentum going?
Yes, thank you. I like to say I will be a mayor of both and, not either or. It's not about downtown or neighborhoods. It's about downtown and neighborhoods. And I will have a strategic master plan that includes each of the 7 districts to help spur economic development throughout the neighborhoods. Every district should have a commercial corridor as well as office parks. And it could be a technology park or a traditional office park where we're employing people in the neighborhoods, and we use incentives to drive development to our neighborhoods.
And to that vein, I want to ask you, what's your
And
plan?
I'm trying to keep it. I'm sorry.
No, it's
go ahead.
okay. No, I
Yeah.
understand. You're doing a good job. You got to get your message out. What's your plan for that public-private investments that so truly needed here in the city?
Yes. So there are a couple of things. First, when we create the strategic master plan, in the plan we'll have input from the residents throughout the city, and once we decide what each of those 7 districts and the neighborhoods within the districts want, if it's a movie theater and a grocery store and a coffee shop, then the city will put incentive packages together to say to developers and businesses, if you can come here and build those things, this is what we'll do for you. The other piece that's really important is cutting red tape.
Yeah. Have you had any conversations with Mayor Duggan?
I have had many conversations with Mayor Duggan over the years, but have we had a recent conversation? As you have probably heard, Duggan has stated he is focused on his run for governor.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, tell us about your leadership style and how you will go about managing the city and the large size of this city, 150 square miles, and the large budget.
Yes. So I would approach management in the same way I've approached, leadership and management throughout my career. It is first, you're talking to the people who are impacted by it, and that is residents, it is businesses, it is nonprofits, and the philanthropy community, and building coalitions in order to deliver in the most effective way. Over the past 10 years as the CEO of the Heat and Warmth Fund, I've had to manage a multi-million-dollar budget and deliver services that required me to build those kinds of coalitions with philanthropy, business, the state and federal government.
Just 2 more questions. We'll be quick here. And I know this one's important to you. MDN, Metro Detroit News, is really committed to supporting our city's future.
Yes.
That includes our young people.
Yes.
What's your plan to support Detroit schools and our young people?
Yes. Thank you for asking that question. It's so interesting to me that right now we're at a senior citizens building, and we always do these informal polls when we go into senior buildings. And what happened today is the same that happens time and time again. Even our senior citizens understand the importance of our schools, because without our youth, we don't have a future. So that is really important to me, building stronger schools for a stronger city. So it's a partnership with our schools to create those safe spaces and places after school between the hours of 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. And it would be a combination of recreation centers, community centers, and schools. And we could partner to leverage our funding for staffing and programs. It's creating career opportunities and keeping our kids safe, giving them hope. At the end of the day, if a kid doesn't have hope for his own life, it's hard for him to have hope for yours. And this is personally important to me because I lost my 14-year-old brother to gun violence. So I understand the real impact of violence on our kids and the lack of hope for some of our kids.
Our last question for you is, what's the message that you want all Detroiters to hear from you?
Yes.
Look at the camera when you say
Yes.
No.
My message is, I see you. I see you. If you are having an amazing experience as a Detroiter and you want to continue this progress, I see you. But if you're struggling to find affordable housing or to pay your utility bills, if you're struggling with violence in your community, I see you. If you're struggling with addiction, I see you. I am a mayor of the people because I come from the people, and I've had so many of the blessings that Detroit offers, but I've also experienced the challenges. So I understand, and I would be a mayor that is there for you, representing you, fighting for you, and delivering for you. Thank you.
Hey, Council President. First, I just want to wish you a happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Still celebrating. Sorry, no, I'm just.
Turn up, Dana. So we've asked the other candidates similar questions to these, or actually the same exact questions.
Okay.
So we're not treating you any differently.
Okay.
If protest happens under your leadership, Council President, How would you respond? And how would you ensure public safety while still protecting the right to peacefully protest?
So I want to say, we're living in definitely politically challenging times, and a lot of people have a right to voice their concerns about issues that are impacting them and their quality of life. And so I think it's important that we allow residents in our city to activate and use their freedom of speech, but we have to make sure it's done in a way that brings peace and safety in our community. So we'll make sure it's done in a proper way, utilizing DPD to maintain safety within our communities.
In last week, 2 homicides happened. Metro Detroit News was on the scene of those. What is your strategy to reduce violent crime, especially in neighborhoods most affected by it?
Yeah, so we've made tremendous progress with crime in Detroit, but again, people have to feel safe. And so we're going to continue to invest in community violence intervention. In the areas that they're in neighborhoods right now, there's 50% reduction in crime or more. So we'll continue to invest in community violence intervention, which is organizations going out into community and connecting young people and those who are in those neighborhoods with the information and resources that they need to improve their quality of life. We're going to also invest in more community policing, boots on the ground, ensuring that officers are more present in our neighborhoods in a way that's not over policing them, but still empowering them and building trust. And then lastly, I am going to open up an office of gun violence prevention and ensure that we're treating gun violence as a public health crisis as well.
We're going to switch now to supporting small businesses. How will you expand support for small businesses across the entire city, not just downtown or midtown as we often hear? And how will you keep downtown's momentum going?
Yeah, so we're going to make Detroit the best place in America to grow and start a business. And we're laying the groundwork right now by ensuring that we're cutting red tape, reducing requirements that are not needed, and getting capital directly into the hands of our small businesses. That's the most important thing that we hear from entrepreneurs, is that it's too difficult in Detroit to do business. So we want to make it less difficult. We're going to continue to expand our current programs like Motor City Match, Detroit Means Business. These are entities that provide capital and technical assistance to entrepreneurs. We're also going to open up a small business office of small business affairs to ensure that small businesses have the support in the ecosystem that they need. And we're going to market development in our communities and our neighborhoods to ensure that they have access to commercial properties and storefronts and commercial corridors to be able to develop and open up their shops right here in Detroit.
And then this question is kind of on the same vein, but what is your plan for public and private investments?
Well, public and private investments have to be a strong partner in what we do in Detroit. We need partnerships. We know that Detroit cannot do this on its own. The slogan of my campaign is "Together we can and together we will." So we're going to leverage public-private partnerships in a way that address the myriad of issues that Detroit has, whether it's investing in our neighborhoods, providing more access to quality, affordable housing and home ownership, strengthening our neighborhoods and public safety, and building our middle class. All of that can be done with strong public-private partnerships. So we're going to leverage those to the best of my ability to improve the quality of life for residents.
And Council President, this is a fun question, but have you had any conversations with Mayor Duggan lately?
Yes, I have. Yep.
You've already said that you've had conversations with Mayor Duggan. Tell us your leadership style and how you will go about managing the city and its large size and budget.
Yeah, so I'm proud to say that 12 years under my leadership, we have passed 12 balanced budgets. 11 of them have been surplus budgets. So have fiscal discipline and fiscal management, which I bring to the table, which I think is very important. My leadership style is collaborative. I don't feel that I need to tell everyone what to do or lead in a dominant way where I don't include people's voices and empower them to be a part of the process. So my leadership would be collaborative, bringing people to the table, stakeholders to the table, community and neighborhoods to the table to be a part of really growing and rebuilding our city in a positive direction.
And just a couple more questions here. What's your message to Detroiters who feel unheard, left behind, or skeptical that real change is possible?
Detroit, I see you. I hear you, and I am you. I was born and raised in Detroit. I'm a daughter of this city. My entire life has been serving this city, trying to move this city forward in a positive direction. And I can assure you that better days are ahead of us. You have a leader here who values people, who values community, and is going to ensure that as this city grows and as this city continues to experience a rebirth, that everyone feels that benefit as well. So I'm excited about this next phase of Detroit to really build our neighborhoods, strengthen our housing and public safety, and ensure that we're building our middle class here in Detroit.
And Council President, Metro Detroit News is committed to supporting our children's future and the city's future. So what's your plan to support Detroit schools and young people?
Yeah, so I've always supported our youth. As the youngest ever elected to city council, it's been my mission to empower young people to reach their full potential in life. So whether that's investing directly in youth programming, investing more in our rec centers to have more after-school programming and recreational activities for our youth, and more productive and safe spaces for young people to have productive things to do. That's very important to me. And while the mayor does not control the school system, the mayor can be a greater partner. And I plan to use my entire authority and position to ensure that we're creating better educational outcomes for our youth from an academic standpoint, in a social, in a mental standpoint, to ensure that the whole self of a child and our youth are better here in the city of Detroit.
Last question for you, Council President. What is the message you want every Detroiter to hear from you? And before you answer, you can look right in the camera and answer that question. I'll ask it one more time. What's the one message you want every Detroiter to hear from you?
And you can take your time if you want. Sorry.
Detroit, I want you to know that it has been an honor to serve the last 12 years. I have led this city with integrity, always ensuring that I am representing and advancing the needs of everyday Detroiters. I am excited about this opportunity now to build on the foundation that has been laid and ensure that we're building a Detroit where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Together we can, and together we will get it done. I would love to have your support in this upcoming election. I've been here. I've been committed to you, fighting for you, alongside you from day one. And I want to continue that work now, serving in the mayor's office. So let's get it done, Detroit.
Perfect.
First, Todd, thank you for doing this interview with me. We'll just walk along here.
Okay, yeah.
And thank you for what you do in the community. I think the first question is, why'd you select here to talk about your campaign and why you're running for mayor of Detroit?
Because it all starts here. For me, you know, I live in a house that my great-grandfather bought, I believe, in the 40s. When he came from the South, from the Great Migration, along with his 3 sons. And, you know, it wouldn't be any other place but here to do it. And, you know, this is a place that has changed. You know, this field where the football field is, I was the last kindergarten class that went to school in that field. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's changed. You know, this used to be a street. They went all the way through to the freeway. My parents talk about when you used to be able to walk to Hamtramck because 75 didn't exist. So, yeah, what other place? You know, it is probably one of the oldest places, you know, oldest parts of Detroit, you know, except the foot of the river. But this is the next best thing as far as, you know, historical aspects of Detroit. And, you know, it's changing, but, you know, I want to be a part of that, and I want to make sure that we steward it in the right way.
As we mentioned, a lot of this is going to go on social, so we try to keep it a little bit tighter.
Right.
Hopefully, you know, your ratings, I see they're going up and stuff, so
yeah,
maybe we'll see more. I look forward to getting your perspective on this one, because what we're seeing right now across the country, LA, New York, Chicago, Detroit now also, we're seeing a small protest downtown.
Right.
If a protest happens under your leadership, how would you respond? And how would you ensure public safety while still protecting the right to peacefully protest?
Well, I mean, I believe that it's a constitutional right. It's the freedom of speech. It's the freedom of expression. And those things should be protected. You know, if we don't protect those things, then the very fabric upon which this country's been built is deteriorating. We see that people are trying to dismantle it and trying to rework the fabric and create their own dynamic. And, you know, some people call it tyranny. Some people call it, you know, despotism. But I call it a city, I will call it a city that will protect those who want to peacefully protest. I mean, whatever the protest is, we're going to protect that. And, you know, the federal government is the federal government, but we're going to do everything to protect our citizens so that they can voice their opinion, and then their voices are never going to be silenced.
We're going to talk about crime now real quick.
Right.
2 homicides overnight.
Yeah.
Metro Detroit News was on the scene of those crimes. What is your strategy to reduce violent crime, especially in neighborhoods most affected by it?
Right. Well, I mean, that's really not a simple issue or a simple question, but policing has to be, it can't be a one size fits all for all the city. You know, we have to recognize that different areas of the city should be policed differently, but the police should be fit and tailor made for that particular area in which they're policing. And that's going to involve the input of the community. That's going to involve the input of the neighborhood organizations, and and they're going to have real input, not just lip service. They're going to be able to tell the police what needs to be done, and those things be taken into the sort of calculus that's created, and will ultimately create the plan for those areas. You have to, like I said, 6 Mile and Gratiot is going to be policed differently than Sherwood Forest. It is, but at the same time, police are going to live by, in a Perkins plan, police are going to live by the mantra, protect and serve. A lot of times you see there's been a lot of, police are looked at in many neighborhoods, even like my own neighborhood, are looked at as outsiders, as looked at as the enemy. And, that's because they don't ingratiate themselves. They don't, make themselves well known. And when they arrive, they're arriving because of problems. The police should be interactive and be a part of the fabric of the community.
We're flipping the script again here. We're talking about support for small businesses. So how will you expand support for small businesses across the entire city, not just downtown or midtown?
Yeah, right.
And how will you keep downtown's momentum going?
Well, I think downtown's up and running. I mean, the incentives, I look at it should have been as a catalyst to creating and moving the reaction. And the reaction's already, it's percolating, it's bubbling, and there's vitality, there's momentum that you see. But we need to take that same momentum and take that same inertia, and move it in that direction into the neighborhoods and the shockwave that comes with it, which means using our resources and using those companies and corporations that have benefited from being downtown to come uptown and working interactively with our communities.
Have you spoken recently to Mayor Duggan?
I did. I actually spoke to him last week. Yes. I spoke to him, and I questioned his exit from the Democratic Party. I told him, I said, I thought you didn't need to leave the Democratic Party. You probably still would have won. He says, I'm going to win anyway as an independent. I said, okay, mazel tov. And I talked to him about what's going on in the city, and we had a 30, 40-minute conversation. That's actually the first time I've ever talked to him.
I would love to expand more on that, but I won't here. But tell us your leadership style, because going back to the Charlie LaDuff and Karen Dumas and you all sitting down for a forum where some people thought the temperament was off, or I thought that it was good. I'm not saying you were off, but I thought it was good that we could all see real candidates in real life. So tell us your leadership style. How will you go about managing the city and its large size, 150 square miles, and a very large budget?
Right. Well, okay, let's talk about all those things. 139 square miles, $1.5 billion discretionary budget, $3 billion budget. And I'll say this to that, when people were talking about the raucousness in the crowd, I look at that as the outpouring of emotion that people feel like they were not heard and have not been heard in quite some time. That's how I looked at it. People still got to argue their position, but as it relates to my leadership style, I think you lead with humility. You lead with the understanding that I may not know everything, which is the reason why I'm always in the community asking and talking to people. That's why I like living in a community in which, people have real issues and they have real concerns. I mean, as to the very things like car insurance, getting on bus routes, and very, very the necessities of life, but also things that some people may overlook because they have more than than the average person. So we need to understand what Detroiters as a whole need, and then start to build that out for them, because you understand. You make a certain amount of money, it doesn't matter whether the economy is going up or down. For a lot of people, it just doesn't matter if they have the money. But for some people, it makes a difference in, almost like life and death.
So what's your message to Detroiters who feel unheard, as you mentioned, or left behind, or skeptical about real change?
Well, skeptical. Don't be skeptical about real change in a Perkins plan. I'm telling you, the good news is coming. Your voice will be heard. My stock and trade has been on listening to people. My success that I've ever had has been listening to people. In fact, I was telling someone earlier today, some of the best questions I've ever asked in the courtroom came from my client. I didn't overlook him because that person lived that experience. It's just like these Detroiters who are living their own independent Detroit experience. You got to know what that is. You've got to ask the question. You can't just tell people what you're going to do for them without knowing what they need.
Yeah, let's talk about our future. MDN, they're committed to supporting our city's future. So what's your plan to support Detroit schools and our young people and our kids in our communities?
Well, you know, we can't have a city that grows without a system of education that's better. You know, what I always say, great cities are made by great neighborhoods and great schools. And you have to have that in order to the great schools. You're not going to get the young couples. You're not going to get the students that we owe an obligation to give an education so that they can go out in the world. You're just not going to be able to compete. So that's, you know, as much as people want to say the mayor does not control the schools, is of no moment. It means that we become more adamant about using our resources and building our rec centers and supplying them with tech, like this building right here. This is in my neighborhood and hasn't been open, like I said, in over 40 years. And, you know, having technology and having access to internet, tutors, and making sure that after-school programs for students are active, alive, and giving them safe routes to school, safe routes to recreation and to after-school programs, and safe routes home. You have to do that.
And last question, and you can look at the camera for this one. What's the one message you want every Detroiter to hear from you?
You matter. Detroiters, you matter, because for so long, I do believe, and the neighborhoods are clamoring for attention, are clamoring for the love that is seeing its way downtown versus what doesn't seem to exist in some aspects of the neighborhood. And, you know, I can't say that for all the city, but I can say that for a lot.
All right, thank you.